Picture a house at night with every window glowing warm and gold. Inside, people are laughing, eating, arguing about small things, believing their small things matter. You used to live in that house. You knew every room. And then one day you walked outside into the dark to look at the stars. And when you turned around to go back in, you couldn't find the door anymore. The house is still there. The lights are still on. But something in you has changed so completely that you can see it now for what it is. A set, a stage, a warm little fiction. And no amount of longing will let you climb back through those glowing windows into the comfort you had before you saw. That is the part nobody warns you about. Everyone sells you the stars. Nobody mentions the house you can never enter again. Carl Jung understood this better than almost anyone, because he refused to romanticize the thing everyone else was busy romanticizing. He watched people undergo genuine expansions of consciousness, and he noticed that these expansions always arrived with an invoice attached. Something was gained, yes, but something was also taken, and the taking was permanent, and most people were never told to expect it. They came to him confused and grieving, unable to understand why the supposed gift of awakening felt so much like a loss. Today, I want to walk you through what Jung discovered about the hidden cost of waking up, the specific things it strips away, why those losses are irreversible, and why the ache you might be feeling right now, standing in the dark outside your own lit windows, is not a sign that you took a wrong turn. It might be the most honest thing that's ever happened to you. But honest and comfortable are rarely the same thing, and Jung was never willing to pretend otherwise. Let's start with what awakening actually is, because the word has been so badly abused that it barely means anything anymore. Jung didn't think of consciousness as a light switch you flip into permanent bliss. He saw it as an expansion of what you're able to perceive, about yourself, about the people around you, about the machinery running underneath ordinary life. Awakening, in his framework, meant that things which were previously unconscious became conscious. The hidden became visible. And here is the trap embedded in that definition. Once something becomes visible, you cannot make it invisible again. That's the root of every cost we're going to talk about. Awareness is a one-way door. You can walk through it, but there's no walking back. The alchemists Jung studied for decades understood this instinctively. They knew that once you'd separated a substance into its parts, you couldn't unseparate it and pretend the work had never happened. Consciousness operates the same way, which means every insight you gain arrives with a corresponding loss, and the losses are the part the spiritual marketplace conveniently forgets to mention. The first thing awakening takes from you is the ability to belong easily. Think about what belonging actually requires. To belong to a group, a family, a friendship circle, a workplace, a whole culture, you have to share its assumptions. You have to agree at some level about what matters, what's real, what's worth wanting. Belonging is a kind of collective agreement, a shared dream that everyone participates in maintaining. And most people never question the dream because questioning it would mean stepping outside it, and stepping outside it is terrifying. Jung recognized that the moment you become conscious of something the group is unconscious of, you've quietly left the group. You might still be sitting at the same dinner table. You might still be showing up to the same job, but inside, you've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. You can hear yourself agreeing to things you no longer believe. You can watch conversations play out and see the anxious machinery underneath them, the status games, the fear dressed up as opinion, the desperate need for approval that everyone pretends isn't there. And you can't unsee it. You're at the table, but you're really standing outside the house, looking in through the glowing window, watching people you love perform a life you can no longer perform with them. This is one of the loneliest experiences a human being can have, and almost nobody names it. You don't lose these people because of a fight. There's no dramatic betrayal, no clean break you could point to and explain. You simply outgrow the shared dream, and the connection that was built on that dream starts to feel thin, like you're both reading lines from a script that no longer means anything to you. They can feel it too. They sense you've gone somewhere they can't follow, and often they resent it, because your awareness makes their comfort feel fragile. Jung watched this happen to his patients over and over. The ones doing the deepest inner work would report the same strange grief. They'd say their relationships had started to feel hollow, that gatherings which used to nourish them now left them exhausted, that they couldn't find their way back into the easy belonging they used to take for granted. And they'd assume something was wrong with them. What Jung understood was that nothing had gone wrong. They'd simply paid the first installment on the cost of consciousness, and the currency was belonging. The second thing awakening takes is the comfort of your illusions, and this one cuts deeper than people expect. Because illusions aren't just pleasant lies, they're load-bearing. We build our lives on a foundation of comfortable beliefs. The belief that our parents did the best they could, the belief that our suffering has a clean, redemptive meaning, the belief that the person we married is exactly who we thought they were, the belief that our career means what we told everyone it means. These illusions aren't stupid, they're protective. They hold the weight of a life together, the way certain walls in a house are the only reason the roof doesn't come down. Jung discovered that awakening doesn't gently update these beliefs, it knocks the walls out. When consciousness expands, you start seeing your own history with a terrible new clarity. You see the ways you were shaped that you never chose. You see the compromises you made and called maturity. You see the relationships you stayed in out of fear and called love. And here's the part that makes it a genuine cost rather than a simple upgrade. Seeing the truth doesn't automatically make you happier. Often, at first, it makes you far more miserable. There's a reason people cling to their illusions with such ferocity. Ignorance really is a kind of comfort. When you don't see the dysfunction in your family, you can enjoy the holidays. When you don't recognize that your work violates something essential in you, you can keep collecting the paycheck without your soul screaming about it. When you can't perceive the manipulation in a relationship, you can stay. And staying is easier than the earthquake of leaving. Illusions let you rest. Awakening takes the rest away. Jung was unusually honest about this. He didn't think the goal of psychological work was to feel good. He thought the goal was to become whole, to become real. And he acknowledged plainly that becoming real often feels much worse than staying asleep. His patients frequently got more distressed as they got more conscious, at least in the beginning, because they could suddenly see everything they'd been protecting themselves from. The protective blindness was gone, and what stood in its place was raw, unmediated reality, including all the parts of their lives that needed to change, but that they weren't yet ready to change. Imagine a woman who spent 20 years telling herself that her marriage was fine, that the loneliness she felt was normal, that everyone eventually settles into this kind of quiet distance. That story let her sleep at night. Then, through whatever door it entered, a book, a loss, a slow interior shift she couldn't stop, awareness arrived, and suddenly she could feel exactly how alone she'd been for 2 decades. The story didn't work anymore, and now she had to live inside the truth of it, wide awake, with no anesthetic. That's not liberation, not at first. That's the bill coming due for 20 years of a comfortable lie. The third cost is one of the most disorienting. Awakening takes your certainty, and it takes your maps. Most people navigate life using inherited maps. They absorb a set of rules from their culture, their family, their religion, their moment in history. And those rules tell them what a good life looks like, what success means, what they should want, how they should measure whether they're doing well. The maps are enormously useful. They tell you where to go. They spare you the exhausting labor of figuring out your own existence from scratch. Even when the maps make people unhappy, at least the unhappiness has a shape. You know why you're struggling, because you can measure yourself against the marked path and see how far you've fallen short. Jung saw that genuine awakening burns the maps. Once you become conscious of how much of what you wanted was never actually yours, how much was inherited, absorbed, installed in you before you were old enough to consent, the entire navigation system loses its authority. The markers of success stop compelling you. The milestones everyone chases start to look arbitrary, and you're left standing in open country with no path, no north, and no guarantee that anything you choose will turn out to matter. He called the deeper process behind this individuation, the slow, lifelong work of becoming your own person rather than a composite of everyone else's expectations. But he never pretended individuation was comfortable. To become genuinely yourself, you first have to lose the borrowed self that told you who to be, and losing it means losing the certainty that came with it. The person following the inherited map at least knows where they stand. The person who has burned the map knows nothing except that the old directions were false. That's a frightening kind of freedom. It's freedom that feels, in the early stages, almost identical to being lost. And this is where so many people turn back. They reach the edge of their old certainty. They feel the ground dissolve, and the terror of having no map sends them scrambling back toward the lit house. They readopt the beliefs they'd started to question. They recommit to the goals they'd begun to doubt. They rebuild the maps out of the wreckage and tell themselves they were foolish to ever wander off. And from the outside it looks like wisdom, like they came to their senses. Jung saw it differently. He saw people who couldn't tolerate the open country long enough for their own true direction to emerge, and who settled instead for a borrowed direction, because a false map felt safer than no map at all. If you've reached this part of the journey and you recognize it, the burned maps, the vanished certainty, the strange grief of a belonging you can't get back to, then you already know this isn't a road anyone can walk for you. But you don't have to walk it without any tools at all. Our guide, True Self-Discovery, was built for exactly this stretch of open country. It's 24 reflection exercises drawn from Jung's own approach, designed not to hand you a new map to follow blindly, but to help you learn to read the terrain of your own psyche. So the not knowing becomes something you can move through instead of something that sends you running back toward the lights. You'll find the link just below. And now let's keep going, because the deepest cost is still ahead. The fourth thing awakening takes is your innocence about yourself. This is the one that Jung considered most important and most avoided, and it's the reason so much of what passes for spirituality is really an elaborate way of dodging it. Everyone wants to awaken to the light. Almost nobody wants to awaken to the shadow. But Jung insisted, over and over, that there was no genuine consciousness without confronting the shadow, the whole disowned underside of yourself, the greed and cruelty and manipulation and pettiness and rage that you've spent your entire life insisting isn't you. When you truly wake up, you don't just see the illusions in the world, you see them in yourself. You see the ways you've used people. You see the selfishness dressed up as generosity, the control dressed up as care, the times you played the victim to avoid taking responsibility, the countless small manipulations you ran without ever admitting they were manipulations. You lose the comfortable story that you're one of the good ones, and that loss is brutal, because the story that you're fundamentally good is one of the deepest illusions any person holds. Jung believed that most people go their entire lives without ever meeting their shadow, and that this avoidance is precisely why so much cruelty exists in the world. The person who cannot see their own darkness doesn't stop having darkness. They just project it outward, onto other people, onto other groups, onto anyone convenient. Real awakening pulls those projections back home. It forces you to admit that the capacity for everything you've condemned in others lives in you as well. And there is no way to feel good about that in the moment you first see it clearly. It's a genuine grief, the death of your own innocence, the end of being able to comfortably stand in judgment above anyone. But here's what makes this the most important cost of all. It's the one that actually transforms you. The person who can hold their own shadow without collapsing into self-hatred and without splitting it off onto others becomes something rare. They become whole. They stop needing to perform goodness because they've made peace with the fact that they contain everything, light and dark both. And they can choose consciously instead of being run by the parts of themselves they refuse to look at. Jung thought this was the entire point. But he never pretended you could reach it without first paying the terrible price of seeing yourself clearly and losing the fiction that you were ever purely good. Now, there's a version of all this that the spiritual world sells constantly, and I want to name it because it's the reason so many people wander for years and never actually wake up. The counterfeit version promises you all the light with none of the loss. It tells you that you'll transcend suffering, feel connected to everything, radiate peace and love, and ascend past your grubby human problems into some serene, higher state. It's the awakening as a self-improvement upgrade. You, but better, with more glow and fewer bad days. Jung would have recognized this immediately as the ego defending itself with spiritual language. Because the ego doesn't want to be transformed. It wants to be improved. It wants to add enlightenment to its existing structure like a trophy on a shelf, while keeping the structure completely intact. And a whole industry exists to sell exactly that. The feeling of awakening with none of the cost of it, the language of consciousness with none of the shadow work, the sensation of profundity that changes nothing about how you actually live. It feels wonderful, it demands nothing, and it keeps people asleep more effectively than ordinary unconsciousness ever could, because now they're asleep and convinced they're awake. The real thing costs. That's how you tell the difference. If your awakening has cost you nothing, no relationship strained by your refusal to keep pretending, no comfortable illusions demolished, no encounter with your own darkness, no vertigo of lost certainty, then Jung would gently suggest you haven't awakened to anything yet. You've bought the trophy. The genuine process is far less flattering and far more expensive, and the people going through it rarely feel enlightened. They feel raw, exposed, sometimes half mad, standing outside the lit house they can't return to, unsure whether they've found something or simply lost everything. Which brings us to the question that matters most, the one Jung spent his life circling. If awakening costs all of this, your belonging, your comforting illusions, your certainty, your innocence, then why would anyone choose it? Why not stay in the warm house with the glowing windows? Why not keep the illusions, follow the maps, enjoy the easy belonging, and never once turn around to look? Jung's answer was not that awakening feels better. He was too honest for that. His answer was that the alternative is a slow death you don't notice you're dying. He observed that the people who spent their whole lives inside the lit house, never questioning the dream, never turning around, paid a cost too. They just couldn't perceive it because it happened so gradually and looked so much like a normal life. It was the cost of never becoming who they actually were. The quiet erosion of vitality that comes from living someone else's script for 50 years. The dull ache in the chest at 3 in the morning that no achievement ever fully silences. The sense, usually arriving late in life, of having lived carefully and correctly and somehow entirely beside the point. Jung called this the tragedy of the unlived life, and he thought it was the most common tragedy there is. So it's not a choice between cost and no cost. Both paths cost. That's the truth almost nobody says out loud. Staying asleep costs you your own life, paid out in installments so small you never feel the individual withdrawals. Waking up costs you everything you built on the false foundation, all at once, in a way you feel with devastating clarity. One pain is spread across decades and mistaken for normalcy. The other is concentrated and unmistakable. Jung believed that the concentrated pain, as awful as it is, at least leads somewhere. The diffuse pain of the unlived life just circles forever until the circling runs out of time. There's something else Jung understood about this that offers a strange kind of comfort. The losses of awakening are real, but they're losses of things that were never fully yours to begin with. The belonging you lose was belonging to a shared illusion, not to the actual people. And Jung found that awakened people, once they emerged from the loneliest stretch, became capable of a deeper kind of connection than they'd ever had before. Not the easy belonging of a shared dream, but the rare, real intimacy of two people who've both stopped pretending. That connection is harder to find and slower to build, but it's made of something that doesn't dissolve when the dream ends. The certainty you lose was borrowed certainty, built from other people's answers. What replaces it, eventually, is something Jung valued far more: a relationship with your own depths, an inner authority that doesn't depend on external maps because it draws its direction from the self, the deeper center of the psyche that knows things the ego never could. That inner compass takes a long time to trust, but once you have it, it can't be taken from you by anyone's disapproval or any change in circumstance, and that makes it worth more than all the borrowed certainty in the world. And the innocence you lose, the fiction that you were purely good, that one you're better off without. Jung was clear that the person who knows their own darkness is far less dangerous than the person who's convinced they don't have any. The cost of losing your innocence about yourself buys you something invaluable: the end of unconsciously projecting your worst qualities onto everyone else, and the beginning of actually being able to choose who you are instead of being run by what you refuse to see. None of this makes the cost stop hurting. Jung would never have promised you that. What he offered instead was meaning, the recognition that the pain isn't random, isn't punishment, isn't evidence you failed. It's the specific, necessary price of becoming real in a world that mostly settles for comfortable. The darkness you're standing in outside the lit house isn't the absence of the awakening you were promised. It's the awakening itself, arriving in the only form it ever actually takes. Because here is the thing the marketplace can never sell you. The stars you walked out into the dark to see, you can only see them because you left the lit house. Inside, the glow of the windows drowns them out completely. You have to be standing in the dark, where it's cold and lonely, and there's no door back in, to look up and finally see what was always there above the roof, invisible from inside the warm little fiction. The house has to go dark for you before the sky can go bright. That's the trade Jung spent his life documenting. You give up the warm, lit, comfortable, borrowed life. And in exchange, you get the cold and the loneliness and the vertigo and the shadow. And, if you can stay in it long enough without running back, you also get the stars. Your own real life, direction, and depth. None of it drowned out anymore by the glow of everything you were supposed to want. If you're in that dark right now, if you felt the belonging thin out, the illusions crack, the maps burn, the shadow rise, then you already know this isn't a road you can unwalk. There's no climbing back through the window, but you're not as lost as the darkness makes you feel, and you don't have to feel your way through it with nothing in your hands. Our guide, True Self-Discovery, was made for people standing exactly where you're standing. 24 reflection exercises rooted in Jung's work, built to help you meet your shadow, read your own terrain, and find the stars that only become visible once the house goes dark. It won't hand you back the comfort you lost. Nothing could. What it offers is a way to make the crossing something you move through with intention, instead of something that just happens to you in the dark. The link is right below.